At 11:55 p.m. on July 6, 2008, a public phone booth at the Dingxi intersection in Shanghai became the origin point of a chilling mystery. A man with a sharp, guttural accent dialed 110, China's equivalent of 911. "I heard a foreigner calling for help near the Jinsan building," he said urgently. "Tell the police to go and have a look." Then he hung up. The police wasted no time. They drove a patrol car to the vicinity of the Jinsan building, visited several nearby communities, and questioned multiple security guards. They all reported the same thing. They hadn't heard a sound. Everything was calm. Consequently, the report was dismissed as a prank. They had no idea that inside Unit 602, a nightmare had already unfolded. Welcome back to Dark Silk. I'm Richard. For those of you that found me after my first case, thank you for stepping into the shadows with me. As I mentioned before, this channel is dedicated to the crimes of the East that the West rarely hears about. The narratives that gets buried under the neon lights. In a world of AI-generated content and faceless narrators, I'm committed to keeping this channel raw and human. Your support is the only reason I can keep digging through these hidden histories, so if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join my journey in uncovering the dark secrets. Now, let's get back to our case. In the summer of 2008, the eyes of the world were fixed on China. The country was in the final stages of preparing for the Beijing Olympics, and the upcoming 2010 Shanghai World Expo was already transforming the skyline into a forest of construction. In this stuffy, high-pressure atmosphere, international style was the ultimate currency. Since Shanghai joined the WTO in 2001, foreign brands had poured into the market. International style became so popular that if a model had blonde hair and blue eyes, companies could justify an international style tax. A Western face meant a higher price tag even for something as mundane as socks, and I'm talking about clean and unworn socks. This was the world that 22-year-old Diana O'Brien stepped in. But before Diana arrived in Shanghai, she knew almost nothing about the reality of the work waiting for her. Diana's childhood was straight out of a fairy tale. Born in Winnipeg, her family moved to the Okanagan Valley when she was 4. Her parents separated a few years later, and her mother moved with her 3 children to the Gulf Islands near Vancouver. For a long time, they lived on an old 11-meter sailboat docked at the Cortes Islands. On the island, a closed door was a rarity, and unlocked door was the law of the land. It was a beautiful way to live, but it was also this habit that Diana would carry with her to a city that didn't share those values later on. It wasn't until high school that Diana and her mother moved to Salt Spring Island. However, life didn't change that much. Every Saturday, there was a market next to the harbor selling wool, earrings, and local handmade clothes. The stall owners often needed models, and Diana was often pulled aside for product shoots, eventually becoming the model of the island. Diana had the natural qualities for the job. She was 175 centimeters or 5'9", slender and muscular. Growing up in the forest gave her a bright smile, clear eyes, and a tenacity like a wildflower breaking through cracks in stone. In 2007, she sent her portfolio to Cultish Management, the only modeling agency in Victoria, which we will call CM for short. She was hired shortly after. A few months later, she received her first international contract in Milan. This 3-month journey opened Diana's eyes and pushed her determination to become a professional model. However, after returning to Canada, she struggled to find new opportunities. In the spring of 2008, CM introduced her to an opportunity in China. Her agent told her that Shanghai Jiahe International Model Agency had contacted them. They were just starting to recruit white models, and it was described as a good springboard to a new chapter. Diana looked at the official website. JH appeared to be a professional Taiwan-funded brokerage with ties to Europe and collaborations with Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar. On the surface, they look professional, her agent added. Another model named Charlotte is there, and she's already in Vogue. Hearing that a fellow Canadian had already taken the leap, Diana felt more at ease. However, she had never been to China before and didn't speak the language. She was hesitant. The person in charge persuaded her by saying that China's modeling agency is just starting, which meant that it was easier for new models to find opportunities, and that's true. But what the agency in Canada didn't realize was that China's modeling agency was almost entirely unregulated at the time. Unreliable agencies often forced models into grueling overtime, chipped away at their pay, or threatened them with massive breach of contract penalties. Worse, some models even were funneled into promoting liquor at nightclubs or performing at dodgy events. In June 2008, Diana signed a 3-month contract. Her income was split. 10% to CM, 30% to JH, and 10% to the Chinese government. Before a single photo was taken, half her money was gone, but Diana viewed it as a way to pad her resume and see the world. At the time, modeling wasn't on China's legal labor list. To enter the country, Diana had to lie to the visa officer, saying she was a tourist coming to see the Great Wall and the Oriental Pearl Tower. She expected a multiple entry visa but was only granted 30 days. JH told her, "Not a problem, come over and we'll renew it here." When Diana landed on June 24th, she was driven to her new home, the Jinsen building at 488 Zhaohua Road. This 19-story apartment was hidden deep in an alley, shaded by green trees and surrounded by a rusty black iron fence. Though a 24-hour duty sign hung up in the security room, the reality was much less secure. Diana moved into Unit 602, a modeling dormitory she shared with a fellow Canadian, Charlotte. The apartment was subpar, filled with old furniture and broken appliances, and they each had to shell out $360 Canadian a month to stay there, which was a lot for them at the time. By her third day in the city, the illusion of high fashion completely evaporated. Diana was told she had a gig, but instead of a studio or a runway, the driver took her to a noisy nightclub. Her job wasn't to pose for the camera, it was to stand near tables and promote expensive bottles of whiskey. In the following days, she was assigned similar jobs. She had to wear short skirts and dance at the opening of bars and restaurants, enduring the stares and comments of the crowd. The girl who had walked the runways of Milan was now being used as a living wallpaper in a loud, smoke-filled nightclub. The dream hasn't just changed, it had soured. She wasn't a model, she was a mascot. She felt deceived and told her boyfriend and friends in Canada she wanted to go home immediately. However, the high penalty for breach of contract stopped her. She realized her 30-day tourist visa was her only way out. On July 3rd, Diana changed her return ticket to July 24th, the day her visa expired. She didn't tell the modeling agencies, only her family knew. Everyone was counting down the days until she could return home. No one could have imagined that 3 days later, she would be found dead in the stairwell. Monday morning, July 7, 5 a.m. The night in Shanghai had been stuffy and wet from the previous day's rain. As the first light touched the Jinsen building, a janitor arrived to begin her shift. She started her routine in the stairwell, moving floor by floor. When she reached the landing between the 4th and 5th floors, she stopped dead. In the dim, flickering lights of the corridor, she saw a young, foreign woman lying face down in a pool of blood. The janitor's screams shattered the morning silence, bringing the building security running to the gruesome scene. 1 hour later, at 6 a.m., Charlotte was walking home, unaware of the chaos. She had stayed up all night at a friend's house watching movies. As she approached 488 Zhaohua Road, she saw the police tape and the flashing lights. In a daze of confusion and panic, Charlotte ran towards the building. She saw a glimpse of the figure in the stairwell, but in the strobe light terror of the movement, she couldn't process what she was seeing. She actually told a guard she thought the victim was a Chinese woman. Her mind simply refused to recognize the face that was much too familiar. Desperate to find her roommate and make sense of the nightmare, Charlotte ran past the security desk and into the elevator. She pressed the button on the 6th floor, her heart hammering against her ribs as the lift slowly ascended. But when the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor, she froze. A large blood stain smeared on the concrete floor of the corridor. The trail led directly to the door of Unit 602, snaked towards the stairs, and disappeared down towards the 5th floor. This really hit her like a physical blow. The person lying in the stairwell was not a stranger, it was Diana. Terrified that the killer might still be inside the apartment, Charlotte smashed the close button on the elevator, hurried back to the 1st floor, and dialed a friend, her voice trembling as she screamed out that Diana was dead. Police arrived shortly later to find a gruesome scene. Diana O'Brien had been stabbed 22 times. It was only her 12th day in Shanghai. The local precinct was immediately swamped. This wasn't just a murder, it was an international incident. Detectives spread out across the Jensen building, knocking on every door from the ground floor to the roof, looking for anyone who might have seen or heard anything on this stuffy Sunday night. In a moment where the whole world was staring at China, the news that a Canadian female model died in a foreign country with more than 20 stab wounds in downtown Shanghai aroused a lot of suspicion and attention from the Chinese and foreign media, and it also brought a lot of pressure to the Shanghai police. They urgently set up a task force and named the case Shanghai Jensen Building 7-7 homicide. The police began to piece together Diana's final hours, and the clock started ticking backwards. On Sunday afternoon, Diana finished the job selling whiskey in Kunshan and flew back to Shanghai, landing around 7 p.m. She went home, had a dinner with a friend on the 12th floor, and then Charlotte suggested a movie. Diana was tired and she went back to their unit alone. At 10:50 p.m., surveillance showed her returning from a nearby supermarket. Less than an hour later, several neighbors heard screams from the corridor that lasted for a minute or two before it went quiet. However, no one went to check. What you have to know is, in China, there is a strong cultural emphasis on minding one's own business and avoiding meddling in the affairs of others, especially what might have sounded like a private domestic quarrel. Because of this cultural hesitation to interfere, no one called to help, and Diana was left alone. The inside of the apartment was grotesque. The door handle has been stained red. Blood footprints were on the living room tiles and scattered in the kitchen. In Diana's bedroom, there was spatter on the quilt. The room had been turned upside down. Her wallet was empty, her phone was under the bed, and there was blood on the wardrobe. The track showed that she was attacked in the living room first, retreated to the bedroom to try to lock the intruder out, failed, was stabbed again, and then struggled out the stairs where she was chased. Judging from the traces at the scene, the murderer did not come out from the balcony or the window, but the main entrance. And the strange thing is that the door lock had no signs of being pried. The police investigated Diana's social records and quickly denied the possibility of the crime being committed by someone she knew. Her time in Shanghai was too short, she hardly knew any locals. Her life was really simple and most of the time she was traveling. Her roommate Charlotte also had an alibi on the night of the incident, but the roommate mentioned to the police that because Diana came from a safe, close-knit island that was careless, she had developed a bad habit. That is, every time she walked out of the room, she often did not close the door all the way and often left a crack. Every time, her roommate closed the door for her and told her many times, but she always didn't take it to heart. Downstairs, although there was a security room, the slogan of 24-hour duty was more like a title and there was often no security inside. The police realized that on the night of the crime, the door of Unit 602 may not have been locked at all, and the murderer may have simply walked in directly. And the question became, who is this person? In a big city in Shanghai, to find a stranger who walked in through an open door is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Fortunately, there was only one exit from the Jensen building and there were cameras nearby. After the police retrieved the video, a suspicious man was found. At around 10:03 p.m. on July 6, a man wearing a black jacket, black pants, and white shoes entered the building. About 40 minutes later, the man left in a hurry. The right shoulder of his jacket appeared to be torn, and there were still some stains on his clothes. But he left empty-handed with no sign of theft. The police immediately expanded the viewing scope of the surveillance video. This time, a major discovery was made. At about 3:05 in the morning, the same man appeared downstairs again. He was riding a bicycle around the apartment building as if to scout and assess the area. 10 minutes later, he entered the building again. This time, he stayed for half an hour. After he left, he had an extra suitcase in his hand. Charlotte instantly recognized that this was her roommate Diana's suitcase. The police concluded that this man must have been involved in Diana's death. The forensic report also revealed Diana's moments before her death. She was wearing a t-shirt and skirt on the night of her murder, and there were no signs of SA. A total of 22 knife wounds were found, mostly shallow skin injuries, which would have been caused by her resisting. But there were several very deep cuts pointing directly at the chest cavity, liver, and heart. The tool used to commit the crime was a single-edged weapon with a width of about 2 centimeters and a length of more than 8 centimeters. Diana did not pass away immediately after being stabbed several times by the murderer. Instead, she crawled along the stairs to try to get help, but only climbed 2 or 3 stairs before she stopped, eventually dying of hemorrhagic shock. The time of death was between 11 p.m. and the early morning. If it was an assault or revenge, then why did that person attack her so violently? Just then, another strange clue appeared. The police in the area reported to the task force that at 11:55 that night, 110 had received an anonymous phone call from a telephone booth. A man with an accent said that he was near Daohua Road and he heard foreigners calling for help. "Tell the police to go have a look," he said. After that, he hung up the phone. After initially treating it as a prank, now it seems like the phone call was probably from the murderer, who wanted the police to save her after the incident. However, this logic can only be said to show that he discovered his conscience at the time, but unfortunately he did not fully discover all of it. Because he was too worried about the exposure of his involvement, he did not specify the specific address. But even if he tried to cover up, he still ignored one point. That is, the police can infer from this that since he can accurately report the road name, and he went to the scene twice, either by foot or on bicycle, it means that he is not far from the place, obviously very familiar with the surrounding area. But it wasn't just his knowledge of the streets that gave him away, it was his voice. To the investigators listening to the 110 recording, his accent was unmistakable. It was the sharp, guttural accent of Anhui, a province that provides much of Shanghai's migrant labor. Armed with two things, the surveillance footage of the man in the black jacket and the knowledge that he likely lived or worked nearby, police began a massive door-to-door sweep of the neighborhood. They visited every small shop, internet cafe, and restaurant within a few hundred meters of the Jensen building. The breakthrough came at a tea house named Hua Ziling. When the owner saw the grainy photo from the security camera, he didn't hesitate. He recognized the man as a former waiter who had gone by the name Chen Zifeng. The owner described him as lazy and incompetent, eventually firing him just weeks before the murder. The police thought they had him. They pulled the copy of the ID card he had used to get the job. It listed him as a resident of Lengxi, Anhui. But when they ran the numbers, the trail went cold. The ID was a fake, a common thing for young migrant workers looking to bypass age or labor laws. However, the ID was fake, but the photo was real. The Shanghai task force sent the image to the Anhui police, broadcasting it to every local station in the region. Finally, an officer from Lingxi recognized him. This wasn't Chen Zifeng. His real name was Chen Jing. He had worked in a children's clothing factory there. Chen Jing was a left-behind child, one of millions in China whose parents moved to cities for work, leaving their children behind to be raised by grandparents in villages. He dropped out of school at 15 to follow his parents' path. When the incident occurred in Shanghai, he was only 18. His 1,000 RMB or $150 salary was barely enough to survive. He spent his time in internet cafes wasting away, escaping into the world of gaming. When he was fired, he spent his last cents on video games and became desperate. On June 11th, the task force captured him in an internet cafe in his hometown. He confessed immediately. He told police he was penniless and just wanted enough money for a bus ticket home. He thought rich people wouldn't mind if I take a few hundred RMB. They might even not call the police. In fact, Chen Jing did not specifically target anyone, but planned to visit door to door to see where he had the opportunity. Since the Jensen building was close to where he used to work, he chose it. The door of the Jensen building was open, and there was no one in the security room. Chen Jing came in easily and walked floor by floor as if he was hunting. When he reached the 6th floor, he realized that the door of 602 was left unlocked, so he pushed the door open and went in. He saw a white Apple laptop on the sofa in the living room. He thought it was valuable and was about to take it. Unfortunately, Diana heard the noise, and when she walked out of her bedroom and saw a stranger standing in her living room, she didn't scream. Coming from Cortez Island, her first instinct wasn't fear, it was politeness. She smiled at him and greeted him in English. It was only when Chen Jing pulled a switchblade and gestured for money that the fairy tale ended. Only then did Diana realize what was going on. She was being robbed. She cried out in panic. Chen Jing panicked and rushed up and stabbed her in the abdomen. Diana fought hard and ran into the bedroom first, instinctively trying to block Chen Jing out of the door. After the failure, she could only escape from the apartment. When she cried for help, Chen Jing was even more panicked. He hurriedly chased her from the 6th floor to the 5th floor. Impulsively, he stabbed her again until Diana fell completely silent and there was no movement. Jing was not even sure if she was dead, but fled the scene in panic. After running out of the community, he was afraid and couldn't think clearly. Maybe he was afraid that Diana had lived and would identify him in the future, or maybe he was afraid that she did die and he would be carrying the weight of the face for the rest of his life. In the end, he sheepishly called 110 to report to the police, saying that he heard a foreigner call for help near the Jensen building, but did not prove any specific. After calling the police, Chen Jing went to the nearby internet cafe for the night. A few hours later, he rode back to the Jensen building, circled downstairs several times to find if the police had taken action. After seeing that everything was calm, he returned to 602 again. He rummaged through Diana's purse, tore open the lining for cash, and then just tossed it back into the bed. Then he took out all the valuable items he could find, including Charlotte's computer and cameras, Diana's Motorola cell phone and Polaroid camera, and stuffed them all into Diana's suitcase. He took a car to a migrant-populated area in southern Shanghai, hid in an internet cafe all night, and fled Shanghai by bus the next day with the suitcase. 6 days after Diana's death, Diana's mother, Deborah, and stepfather, Keith, arrived in Shanghai. Accompanied by an interpreter from the embassy staff, they met Diana. She laid quietly among the flowers and had been changed into a clean dress, but Deborah saw her daughter's body was covered with knife wounds and several deep scars to her fingers. the result of someone who tried to grab the blade with her bare hands to resist. The grief-stricken mother couldn't hold back her tears. At the Shanghai crematorium, she chose a rosewood urn which was clean and without any words or patterns, just like Diana's natural and simple nature. Deborah and Keith later visited the Huaziling tea house. They noticed that the back door of the tea house was facing a narrow valley leading to the Jensen building. Standing in the narrow alley, they could see the balcony of Diana's apartment at a glance. Deborah suddenly had a suspicion. Maybe a long time ago, when June was standing there smoking, he noticed Diana. He might have thought that this foreign woman might be very rich. That night, he observed Diana going out to the supermarket and decided to do it. But he didn't expect her to come home that early. Diana believed that June did not commit the crime randomly, but had planned it all out. But ultimately, only Chen Jun knows the truth. On November 17, 2008, the Shanghai No. 1 Intermediate People's Court heard the case in public. Chen Jun's description in court was different from that in his confession. He said that he did not intend to hurt Diana, but Diana kicked him in the leg after seeing him, so he stabbed her in retaliation. Then he tried to escape, but she blocked him, and he accidentally stabbed her a second time. Diana ran out screaming. He was afraid that the neighbors would hear him, so he lost control and chased her and stabbed her many times in a blind fit of rage. From beginning to end, he tried to explain every stab wound. She kicked me, she blocked me, she was still struggling, I was out of control. It was like tearing off an onion layer by layer, leaving behind murder as the only resort. Defense lawyers stressed that he was only 18 years old, and after fleeing the scene for the first time, he had called the police to prove that he had the intention to save her. However, the prosecutor called out that June did not provide an accurate address when he called the police, which led to the police confusion. More importantly, he also returned to the scene later. He went back to loot the valuables, not to save a life. He watched as Diana laid in the pool of blood and did not do anything to help. What kind of rescue is that? The defense also tried to blame this on insanity, but was immediately rejected by the court. According to China criminal law, he is recommended to be sentenced to death and deprived of political rights for life. After the 2-hour court hearing, Chen Jun pleaded guilty in court, and the court announced that the sentence should be pronounced on another day. According to the basic principles of China's criminal law, a life for life, if there were no surprises, waiting for Chen Jun would be the death penalty. However, there's a special circumstance in China's judicial system. The attitude of the victim's family toward the murderer sometimes affects the final sentencing result. So the judge asked Deborah and Keith in private and asked them, what kind of punishment do you want to see Chen Jun receive? Is it the death penalty, life, or a term less than 25 years? Diana's parents froze. That is not usually the case in North American courts. The two of them did not expect that they would participate in the sentencing, so they were lost for words for a moment. They were not there for revenge, but to find out why they had lost their child. After their silence, they gave their own opinion and suggested a suspended death sentence, meaning a sentence that paused the death penalty for a 2-year probation period. If Chen Jun does not commit intentional crimes during this time, the sentence is typically commuted to life imprisonment. Now, this choice is not understood by many people. An American female journalist interviewed Diana and asked her why she made this decision. Deborah explained that they themselves oppose the death penalty. They believe that people can be changed. Salvation is possible. Death is not the end of justice, and leaving a life, even that of your child's murderer, is a kind of restraint and a kind of belief. Secondly, she knows Chen Jun's family conditions and saw his parents and relatives who came from the countryside and could not even speak to foreigners. They stood in the public gallery embarrassed and at a loss. When people are forced to leave their original lives, driven by market and coerced by consumerism, tragedies like this become more and more frequent. People desire more and more material things but cannot find jobs. Slowly, they stop asking whether they should do it or not, and only care about whether they can live or not. This is a process of personalities being emptied, a process of dehumanization. Deborah even felt that the police and judges had a kind of pity for Chen Jun. This kind of pity was not forgiveness, but also an understanding that they were facing a terrible tragedy, not a simple villain. Then she said the hardest thing for a parent: we lost our child, but we don't want other people's children to be killed. A few months later, the court had delivered a verdict. Chen Jun was to be sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve. As for the modeling agency, JH, when the international media descended on Shanghai, the agency did the only thing an unregulated firm in 2008 could do: they vanished. Within 2 days, Their offices were empty, their phones were disconnected, and their websites were deleted. Diana was gone, and the people who brought her became a ghost as well. After the court hearing, Diana's ashes were brought back to Salt Spring Island and buried on a forest slope. There was no statue, only a simple tombstone with her brilliant, everyday smile, surrounded by shells. It stands as a final testament to a girl from the woods, lost in the city, moving too fast to see her. Diana O'Brien's story is a reminder of the invisible threads that connect us all. The girl who didn't believe in locks, and the boy who felt like he had nothing else to lose. In the rush towards progress and glitter of global cities, it's really easy to forget that the human cost of the shadows we leave behind. If this story moved you, or if you have thoughts about the grace shown by Diana's family, I'd love to hear them from your comments. I read every one of them. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to listen or watch this story, whatever you're doing right now. I hope it's going well. Thank you guys for watching Dark Soak. I'm your host, Richard, and I'll see you guys next week. Until then, stay safe.